The evening my daughter-in-law told me I ought to consider a retirement home where someone competent can watch you, I almost thanked her. Not out of gratitude, but because at 63 years old, standing in my son's renovated brownstone in Back Bay while he decanted a bottle of Barolo he'd flown in from Tuscany, I understood something that had been circling me for decades. I had spent my entire life being the one who kept things from breaking, and somehow that had made me the thing they now wanted to throw away. "Dad wouldn't follow it," my son Daniel said, smiling at the three venture partners seated around his reclaimed oak table. "He's more of a ledger man, numbers on paper. Bad era's over." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was polite. My daughter-in-law Vanessa swirled her glass and added, "Well, thank God someone in the family understands the modern world." She didn't look at me when she said it. That was the crack. Not the first one, but the one I finally heard. My older brother Walter had passed 8 weeks earlier. Congestive heart failure, slow and humiliating the way he would have hated. He was 68, a retired locomotive mechanic from the old Boston and Maine yards, a man who had never owned a suit that fit properly and didn't care. He had no children of his own. His wife had passed a decade before him. When the will was read in a dim office in Lowell, I learned that Walter had split what he owned between Daniel and me. Daniel received the 3-family rental house in Somerville, fully tenanted, generating almost $9,000 a month. I received a shuttered commercial garage on a forgotten stretch of Dorchester Avenue, along with a half-acre lot it sat on. The attorney, a tired man named Gerald Finch, slid the papers across the desk and said, "Your brother was very specific. He wanted the garage to go to someone who'd understand what it was." Daniel had laughed softly at that. Uncle Walt always did have a soft spot for the stubborn one. "Dad, you got the rust, I got the rent roll." He said it like it was affection. Vanessa had squeezed his arm. "I didn't argue. I never did. That had always been my job in this family, the one nobody drafted but everyone expected. I balanced the checkbook. I paid the taxes on the summer cottage we eventually sold. I kept Daniel's first startup alive for 11 months with money I never got back. My late wife Catherine used to say I was the quiet mortar between everyone else's bricks. She said it like a compliment. After she passed 4 years ago, nobody said it at all. That night in Back Bay was meant to be a soft launch for Daniel's new fund. Vanessa had hired a caterer. She had lit candles that smelled like fig and cedar. Daniel was pitching a 3-property redevelopment play across Somerville and Medford, and he'd leveraged Uncle Walt's triple-decker as collateral before the ink on probate had even dried. The investors were impressed. They were the kind of men who wear loafers without socks in October. One of them, a sharp-faced man named Preston, looked at his notes and said there was a second parcel in the estate filing, the Dorchester property. "What's the status on that?" Daniel waved his hand. "My father inherited it. It's a teardown, honestly. Old garage, dead zoning, environmental baggage. Walt kept it for sentimental reasons. Dad'll probably let the city take it for back taxes." Preston chuckled. Vanessa added lightly, "He's been meaning to go through Walt's paperwork for weeks. You know how he is. He reads every line twice." "Twice if you're lucky," Daniel said. The laughter that time was easier. They'd found their rhythm. I sat at the end of the table with my hands flat on the wood, and my face arranged the way I'd arranged it in 1,000 board meetings over 31 years as a municipal auditor for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You learn, in that work, to absorb an insult without letting it land on your face. Insults are just data. You log them, you move on. But something about hearing it in my son's dining room, with Catherine's silver candlesticks on the sideboard where Vanessa had redistributed them, made the data feel heavier. After the investors left, Vanessa poured herself a last half-glass and leaned against the marble island. "Daniel's trying to build something real," she said, not looking at me. "It would mean a lot if you could be a little more present, a little less the accountant. I was an auditor. Same thing to them." She finally met my eyes. "I'm just saying, Richard, you're 63. You've been drifting since Catherine. Daniel's worried. I'm worried. Maybe it's time to think about a place where someone competent can watch you. Not a nursing home, just, a community. I set my cup down. Is that Daniel's idea or yours? It's a conversation. Where is he? Checking the wine cellar. I stood up. My knees made the small sound they always made now. Tell him I'm going to drive out and look at the garage. Tonight. Tonight. She didn't try to stop me. I remember that clearly. She walked me to the door like a hostess walking out a guest who had overstayed, and she said, "Richard, please drive safe and think about what I said." Then she shut the door behind me, and I stood on the stoop in the October cold for a long moment, listening to Daniel laugh at something inside the house. I drove the 40 minutes down Route 93 in silence. No radio, no call, just the old sedan humming and the skyline of Boston sliding past my left shoulder, then disappearing. Dorchester Avenue at 10 o'clock at night is a different country. The streetlights buzz. The bus shelters are empty. The liquor stores have bulletproof glass at the register. Walter's garage sat on the corner of Dot Ave and a side street named after a Civil War colonel. Nobody remembered. 2 bays, a small office wing, a fenced yard behind it with a crumbling concrete pad. The sign above the rolling doors still read Kowalski Auto. Though Walter had bought the place from a man named Kowalski in 1987 and never bothered to change it. The padlock was rusted, but the key Gerald Finch had given me slid in clean. The metal door groaned upward the way every honest old door does. The smell inside hit me first, not unpleasant, just layered. Motor oil settled in the concrete. Cold rubber. A faint salt note from the harbor. I flipped the interior switch, and a single fluorescent tube stuttered on above the service bit. I stood in that cold open space for a while, just looking. Walter's pegboard still had the outlines of wrenches he'd sold off years ago. A 1994 Red Sox calendar hung crooked on the office wall. A metal desk, a filing cabinet, a coffee pot that had probably last brewed coffee during the second Bush administration. On the desk, held down by an empty glass ashtray, was a manila envelope with my name written across it in Walter's square, all-caps handwriting. Just Richard. Nothing else. I sat in his chair, which squeaked, and I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a property tax bill, current, paid, a copy of a commercial lease agreement, 27 pages thick, and a short handwritten note on yellow legal paper that said, in Walter's unadorned hand, "Richie, the front door isn't the important one. Look at the yard. Read the lease all the way through. Don't let the kid sell this. He doesn't know what it is. Neither did most people. That's fine. Walt." I read the note twice. Then a third time. The lease was between Walter Kowalski, as lessor, and an entity called Harperlink Relay Services, LLC, as lessee. The leased area was described as the southern 4,200 square feet of Parcel 14B, together with all subsurface and tower-mounted equipment rights granted herein. The term was 30 years, commencing in 2002. Renewable at lessee's option. Current annual rent, adjusted by CPI with a floor of 4%, was listed in a schedule at the back. I turned to the schedule. The rent for the current calendar year was $194,000. I sat there for a long time, long enough that the fluorescent tube buzzed itself into a headache behind my eyes, long enough to feel the cold coming up through the concrete into the soles of my shoes. $194,000 on a parcel my son had described an hour earlier as a teardown. I walked out the side door of the office into the backyard. The concrete pad was broken in places. Weeds had come up through the cracks. But in the far corner, against the chain-link fence, stood a squat gray equipment shed I hadn't noticed from the street, and next to it, rising maybe 60 feet into the night sky, a slim lattice tower with 3 shrouded antennas at the top and a blinking red aviation light that I had somehow missed when I pulled up. The shed hummed. Not loudly. A low, steady electrical hum, the kind a working substation makes. I stood in that yard under that tower, and I felt the first clean breath I had taken in months. Walter had not left me a garage. Walter had left me a document. I locked up around midnight. I drove back as far as a cheap chain motel in Quincy. because I did not want to sleep under Daniel's roof, and I did not want to drive the empty house in Newton either. I paid in cash. I lay on the bedspread in my clothes, and I did not sleep much. I thought about my brother, who had worn the same denim jacket for 20 years and who had, apparently, been collecting nearly $200,000 a year from a cellular relay company and had never once mentioned it to anyone. In the morning, I drove back to the garage at first light. I made coffee in Walter's old pot, which surprised me by still working. I sat at his desk and I read the lease the whole way through. I had been an auditor for 31 years. I have read leases that tried to hide things in defined terms on page 2. I have read leases that buried assignments in exhibits. Walter's lease was, to its credit, not one of those. It was written cleanly. HarborLink was a subsidiary of a much larger telecommunications backbone company, and the tower in the backyard was part of a regional relay network that connected Harbor Traffic Control, a federal weather station on Deer Island, and a stretch of commercial cellular service along the South Shore. The lease included a non-relocation clause. It included a buyout provision tied to replacement infrastructure cost. It included a clause on page 19 that gave the lessor a continuing royalty on any sublease of bandwidth capacity, which Walter had apparently never bothered to enforce, but which appeared to have been accruing into an escrow account for 14 years. I set the document down. I picked up the phone on Walter's desk, which still had a dial tone because of course it did, and I called Gerald Finch. "Richard," he said, "I wondered when you'd call." "Gerald. The lease." A long pause. "Your brother was very clear. He wanted you to find it the way he found it, sitting alone in the office with the whole building around you. How long have you known?" "Walter came to me in 2003, a year after the original lease. He updated his will 5 times in 22 years. Every time the garage went to you. Every time he made me promise not to explain it in advance. He said, 'Richie's spent his whole life cleaning up other people's sloppy math. Let him read this one cold. He'll know what to do.' I closed my eyes. Does Daniel know anything? Your son submitted a request 3 weeks ago to have the Dorchester parcel reassigned to him on grounds of best interest of the estate. I declined to forward it. He's called my office 4 times since, most recently yesterday." "What did he say yesterday?" Gerald cleared his throat. He said his father was, quote, "losing the thread," and that the family would be handling the disposition of the garage collectively. He implied there might be a capacity evaluation. The room got very quiet. "Gerald," I said, "if my son attempted to sell or encumber that parcel without my signature, what would that be?" "Fraud, Richard. Several flavors of it." "And if he already tried to put something in motion, then you'd want to act before he closes." I drove back into the city that afternoon and I did 2 things. I stopped at my own bank and I opened a new account in my name alone, separate from the joint account that still had Catherine's name on it and that Daniel had signing privileges on since she passed. Then I drove to a small law firm in Quincy that Gerald had recommended, a firm that specialized in commercial real estate and telecom. I sat across from a woman named Marisol Ortega, who had very calm hands and who read the lease in front of me in roughly 17 minutes. "Mr. Ray Kowalski," she said when she was done. I told her to call me Richard, but she kept the formal distance, which I appreciated. "Are you aware that the escrowed royalty on sublease capacity, calculated at contract rate with interest, is likely between $400,000 and $500,000? I suspected it was significant. Are you aware that the buyout provision, at current replacement cost for a comparable relay node inside the Inner Harbor corridor, is likely between $2.2 and $2.6 million? I put my hands flat on her desk, the way I used to at the end of a long audit, when the numbers had finally stopped moving. "I suspected that too. What would you like to do?" "I would like," I said slowly, "to make sure that nothing my son has already signed or tries to sign can override what my brother left me." Marisol smiled very slightly for the first time. "Then we have work to do." Daniel showed up at the garage on the 3rd morning. I had expected him the 2nd morning. He was always a little slower than he thought he was. He parked his gray SUV on the curb and he walked in through the open bay door, wearing a wool overcoat that cost more than Walter's last car. He looked around the concrete floor the way a man looks at a garbage disposal he has to stick his hand into. Jesus, Dad, it's freezing in here. It is. You slept here. I slept in Quincy. I've been working here. Working on what? He was already pulling a folder out of a leather portfolio, which told me everything. Listen, I talked to a guy, a demo contractor I know. He'll take the structure down for 15.5, and a buyer I'd been talking to will pay $210 for the lot as is, clean close, 30 days. I had Vanessa's cousin draft a quitclaim to move things along. He slid the quitclaim across Walter's old desk. I did not pick it up, Dad, he said. I know this is hard. Uncle Walt dying, then the whole thing with the family dinner. I know Vanessa was blunt. She feels terrible. But let's be real. You're not going to run a garage. You haven't worked on a car since 1988. This isn't about pride. It's about not letting this place drag you down. Sign the quitclaim, let me handle the sale, and we'll put the proceeds somewhere sensible. I'll even front the capital gains myself. I looked at him. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike in a cul-de-sac in Newton. The boy I had co-signed 3 separate loans for. The young man I had carried through a divorce and a failed juice company, and, more recently, the early tremors of a lifestyle his fund couldn't yet support. Have you been on the property, Daniel? The whole property, Daniel? Hey, I'm on it right now. Have you been in the backyard? He blinked. What? Have you ever walked past the office door into the backyard? Dad, it's a strip of concrete. There's a shed. There's a tower. Okay. He spread his hands, amused. There's a tower. Half the city has towers on their roofs. It's background noise. Have you read Uncle Walt's Lease? He paused, just for a beat. The pause was the thing. The pause told me everything I had come to know in 31 years of audits, which is that the man across from you has not read the document and has been counting on you not to notice. There's a lease on the shed, he said. It's pennies, some old cell carrier. I already had the guy run it. It's assignable. It's not assignable without lessor consent. Dad, and the lessor is me. He put the folder down. What is this? I took the quitclaim, I folded it in half lengthwise the way I used to fold bad expense reports, and I slid it back across the desk to him. Daniel, you came here to get me to sign away something you don't understand. I'm not going to. His face changed then. Not all at once, in stages. The charm first, then the patience, then the calculation. Dad, listen to me. I have buyers lined up. I have obligations against the Somerville property that I leveraged on the assumption that this parcel moves. If this doesn't close in 30 days, I have a problem. Do you understand me? I have a problem. You leveraged Uncle Walt's triple-decker before probate closed? It's a bridge. It's normal. Everybody in the space does it. Against a sale of a parcel that isn't yours. It's the family's. It's mine. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, because he has always been his mother's son in exactly the wrong way, he softened his voice and said, Dad, I don't want to have to do this, but Vanessa and I talked to a doctor about a capacity evaluation. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. But if you're going to dig in on a sentimental thing and put the whole family at risk, we may not have a choice. I looked at my son. I thought about Catherine. I thought about how much of her patience I had inherited and how much of it I had used up. Daniel, I said, go home. Dad, go home. Dad, go home. Talk to your wife. Talk to your attorney if you have one who isn't her cousin. Then, if you still want to have a conversation, call Marisol Ortega at Finch and Ortega in Quincy. She is now representing my interests with respect to the Dorchester parcel. Any communication about the property goes through her. Any attempt to contact me directly about it, any attempt to pursue a capacity evaluation, any attempt to encumber the parcel through a third party will be documented and addressed through her office. The color went out of his face in a way I had not seen since he was 11, and he'd broken Catherine's mother's crystal bowl. "You hired a lawyer against me. I hired a lawyer for the estate. That's the same thing." "No, son, it isn't. And if you cannot tell the difference, you are about to learn it the expensive way." He left. He did not slam the rolling door behind him because it was too heavy to slam, but he tried. What happened next took 9 weeks, and I will not pretend it was dramatic in the way these things look in the movies. Most of it was paperwork. Most of it was phone calls on Walter's ancient handset, because I liked the weight of it. Marisol filed a formal notice with HarborLink Relay Services redirecting the lease payments to the new account I had opened. HarborLink, once they confirmed my ownership and my identity, were almost relieved. They had apparently been trying to clarify the escrow situation with Walter's estate since the week he passed, and they were delighted to hear from a lessor who understood what a sublease royalty was. The escrow released $472,000 into my new account on a Tuesday in November. I remember because I had gone to the bank to deposit a check, and the teller had quietly asked if I'd like to speak with a financial advisor, in the careful voice tellers use when a number goes up suddenly on an older man's account. I said yes. Her name was Angela. She was 41 and competent, and she did not once suggest a retirement community. The buyout negotiation with HarborLink's parent company took longer. They came in at 1.9. Marisol walked them to 2.45 over 6 weeks of back and forth. I signed the agreement on a Thursday in December, in a conference room overlooking the harbor, and the wire cleared on a Monday. After taxes, after Marisol's fees, after setting aside a separate fund for the building itself, I had a little over $1.8 million in an account that had my name on it and no one else's. The garage is still there. I kept the land. I leased the actual building to a young couple, a husband and wife who do honest foreign car repair and who remind me of Walter, the way they wipe their hands on the same rag all day. I kept the office in the back as a small workspace for myself. I go there some afternoons. I read. I sort Walter's old files, slowly the way he would have wanted me to. Daniel's bridge loan came due in the second week of January. The triple-decker in Somerville went into a forced refinance, then a partial sale. He did not lose everything. He lost enough. Vanessa stopped inviting me for dinner, which I had expected, and then, about 6 weeks later, she called and asked if we could talk. I met her at a coffee shop in Back Bay, not the house. I picked the place. I have gotten better, at my age, at picking the place. She looked smaller out of her own kitchen. She said, "Richard, I want to apologize." "For what?" "Specifically." She paused. That pause was the whole conversation, really. She was deciding which version of the apology she thought I would take. Finally, she said, "For the way I spoke to you, about the retirement community, about the way Catherine used to run things, it wasn't my place." "No, it wasn't. Daniel's in a hard spot." "I know. He thinks if you just talked to him differently, things would have gone another way." I stirred my coffee. I thought about that. I thought about it honestly because I am old enough now to ask myself whether an accusation has any truth in it before I throw it back. "Vanessa," I said, "Daniel didn't lose that deal because of the way I talked to him. Daniel lost that deal because he tried to sell something that was never his to sell, and he assumed I wouldn't notice. The only difference between this version of my son and the version I've been carrying for 20 years is that this time I noticed on time." She looked at her hands. "I'm not angry at him," I said, and I was surprised hearing myself to find that it was true. "I'm not angry at you either, but I'm not going to be the mortar in this family anymore. Walter didn't leave me a garage so I could pour myself into another crack." She nodded. She didn't cry. I respected her for that. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "What did Walter leave you, really?" I thought about it for a long time. "He left me a door," I said. "A side door I didn't know was there. And a note telling me to open it." She didn't understand. That was fine. Walter wouldn't have minded. I drove home that night, through the same stretch of Dorchester Avenue where my brother had kept his quiet, humming tower for 22 years. The aviation light on top of it blinked red against the low clouds. The way it had blinked every night I hadn't been watching. The way it had blinked the night Catherine died, and the night Daniel was born, and every night in between. Walter had known it was there. Walter had listened for it. I pulled over for a minute, across the street from the chain-link fence, and I sat in the car with the engine off. The tower hummed, faintly, under the wind, and I thought, not for the first time, that there is a particular kind of dignity available only to people who read the whole document. It is not flashy. It does not make a good toast at a dinner party. It does not photograph well for a pitch deck, but it holds. My brother knew that. My wife, I think, knew that too, though she never said it in those words. And at 63, sitting in a cold car on a street my son had written off as a teardown, I finally understood that I had known it my entire life and had simply been waiting for someone to stop talking long enough for me to say it out loud. If you have ever been the quiet one in your family, the one who balances the books while someone else gives the speeches, I'd like to hear from you. Write to me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what door you haven't opened yet, because I promise you, somewhere in the paperwork of your own life, in a drawer or an envelope or a lease, you never read all the way through. There is something someone left you on purpose. You just have to be the kind of person who looks. If stories like mine are the kind of company you want on a long evening, subscribe and stay a while. There's more here than most people notice at first. There usually is.